Some houses carry a history of love, laughter, and warmth. Others hold secrets too horrifying to imagine. On a quiet street in Westfield, New Jersey, stood a house where an entire family vanished, leaving behind nothing but a chilling silence. John List was a man devoted to his faith, his family, and his principles. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of a respectable church-going father. But beneath the polished exterior lurked something sinister. Something that would unravel in a crime so calculated, so monstrous, that it would take authorities nearly 2 decades to bring him to justice. This is the story of John List, a man who murdered his entire family in cold blood and then disappeared without a trace. To understand John List's twisted logic, we must go back to where it all began. Born in 1925 in Bay City, Michigan, List was raised under the heavy hand of strict German-American parents. His childhood was not one of warmth and affection. It was one of discipline, order, and religious rigidity. List's father, a devout Lutheran, instilled in him a fear of sin and a deep sense of responsibility. Failure was not an option. And so, from an early age, John List became obsessed with maintaining a perfect image. But something was missing. He struggled to connect with others, to form friendships. He was quiet, methodical, an outcast in his own way. And as he grew older, his isolation only deepened. At the height of World War II, John List joined the U.S. Army. He served as a laboratory technician, avoiding direct combat, but embracing the structure and discipline the military provided. After the war, he pursued a degree in accounting, a field that suited his need for precision and control. It was at Fort Eustis, Virginia, in 1950 that he met Helen Morris Taylor. A widow with a young daughter, Helen was unlike anyone John had ever been close to. She was strong-willed, demanding, and as he would later discover, deeply troubled. Their courtship was brief. Helen pressured John into marriage, and he, ever the man of duty, complied. But there was something Helen had hidden from him, something that would haunt their marriage from the very beginning. Helen had syphilis. The disease, in its late stages, left her nearly blind and bedridden for days at a time. It also fueled her drinking, making her increasingly unstable. But John, bound by his religious beliefs, refused to consider divorce. Instead, he buried himself in his work, in his children, in the illusion of a perfect family. They had 3 children, Patricia, John Jr., and Frederick. And for a time, it seemed that John List had found the American dream. A beautiful home, a steady job, a place in the church. But dreams built on deception always collapse. In 1965, John List purchased Breeze Knoll, a lavish 19-room mansion. It was supposed to be a symbol of success, a haven for his family. Instead, it became a prison. By 1971, the walls were closing in. List lost his job, but instead of telling his family, he pretended to go to work every morning. He withdrew money from his elderly mother's account, using her savings to keep up appearances. But soon, even that wasn't enough. To John List, the idea of admitting failure, of succumbing to welfare, was unthinkable. In his mind, there was only one way out. One way to ensure his family didn't suffer the humiliation of poverty. On the morning of November 9, 1971, John List put his plan into action. With 2 old handguns, he approached his wife from behind and pulled the trigger. He then climbed the stairs to the attic, where his 84-year-old mother, Alma, was preparing breakfast. He kissed her on the cheek, then shot her in the head. The first 2 murders had gone as planned, but there were still 3 more victims. Patricia, John's eldest daughter, was a free spirit, creative, ambitious. She dreamed of becoming an actress, but in her father's eyes, her love for theater was a dangerous temptation, leading her away from God. List knew she would return home first. As she walked through the door that afternoon, he greeted her with a hollow smile. Then, before she could react, he pulled the trigger. One by one, John List arranged his victims in the grand ballroom of Breeze Knoll, as if preparing them for a final judgment. John List's 2 sons were still at school. He had time, he had patience, and when they arrived home, he would welcome them, just as he had done with Patricia. The boys returned home as usual, but instead of their mother's voice, they were met with silence. A silence so unnatural, so suffocating, that it sent a shiver down their spines. Before they could react, their father fired. Frederick died instantly, but John Jr., perhaps sensing what was coming, tried to fight back. He struggled, he screamed, but his father was relentless. John Jr. did not die quickly. The autopsy would later reveal he had been shot at least 10 times. His father, cold and calculating, had ensured there was no chance of survival. With his entire family dead, John List did not panic. He did not weep. Instead, he went about his final preparations with chilling precision. He turned on classical church music, filling the house with haunting hymns. He wrote letters to his pastor, explaining why he had done it, insisting that his family was better off dead than facing the immoral world without financial security. He made one final move to ensure he wouldn't be caught. He destroyed every photograph of himself in the house. No one would have an updated image of the man who had just wiped out his own bloodline. And then, with nothing left to do, he vanished. After 18 years of freedom, John List finally faced justice. 5 counts of murder, 5 consecutive life sentences. The quiet, unassuming man, who had spent decades blending into society, would now spend the rest of his days behind bars. Even in prison, he showed no remorse. When asked if he felt guilt for taking the lives of his own family, he simply responded, "I feel the same as I did when I wrote the letter." Cold, unchanged, as if time had not moved at all. As for the house where it all happened, it met a fate as eerie as its history. Less than a year after the bodies were discovered, Breeze Knoll mysteriously burned to the ground. Arson was suspected, but no one was ever charged. Nothing was ever built in its place. The land remains empty, untouched, as if the ground itself refuses to be disturbed. In 2008, John List died in prison at the age of 82. Even to his final breath, he never apologized. He never admitted wrongdoing. To him, he had saved his family from a world of sin. But to the rest of us, he was simply a murderer. John List thought he could rewrite his family's story, erase them, erase himself, and start anew. But history does not forget, and neither do we. Some monsters don't hide in the shadows, they sit at the dinner table.